Today is the 4th day of the February 87 7-day retreat. The question for today's talk is, would one ever do anything if there wasn't a motive? You can put it another way and say, would one ever get out of bed if there wasn't a motive? Or can there be any action without motive? So we don't get too confused right from the outset, can one put aside, maybe we can't, we'll have to look at it, practical matters, matters of survival, assuming also that one is a fairly normal, which means just slightly to middling neurotic person. Not totally incapacitated psychologically, mentally, and physically. We'll put that case aside. That one is mentally, psychologically, or physically incapacitated. One has to eat, to eliminate, to keep warm or keep cool, take care of those organismic needs to survive. And we will say anything done for that in its simplicity, simpleness. We won't call acting with a motive, although you could say, why not? It's also a motive. But for that one would have to get up out of bed. One can't stay in bed and survive unless one is taken care of. One has to eat, eliminate, keep warm. Well, bed is a place to keep warm. It may get too hot. But even looking at that for a moment, staying in bed is also a motive. So just being there is not motiveless. Maybe to get a hold of this question better, we have to ask, what do we mean by motive? Do we mean the motive to survive? We've just said that motive to survive keeps us doing whatever we need to eat and so forth, keep warm, keep out of wetness. And taking care of that may take our whole day. Among primitive people. Primitive, not said in any evaluative way. To hunt, gather, collect food may be a whole day's job to grow it, to harvest it. prepare it, take care of the fuel and so forth, and the children. We haven't listed procreation in this. Because I'm not sure that a human being has to procreate, has to have sex, as one has to eat or keep warm. But in our present day society, with all the division of labor, it's relatively simple to get some food and clothing, but one has to have money to get it, so one has to work if one wants to take care of one's simple physical needs. So even if no other motive is there, that motive to survive, take care of the physical organism, will keep one doing things, earning a simple living and enough to pay for rent, or if one is so inclined, enough to pay for a piece of land, some materials to build a house, and so forth. So one can look whether what motivates one's actions and thoughts, because often we think out, we've got to get food today, and then the action out of that thought. Whether what motivates one's thoughts and actions are simple survival needs, or whether there is more that motivates one's action. Obviously, there's more. Very few of us, maybe no human beings, simply act out of the motivation for sheer survival, except in cases of natural or man-made disaster and emergency. Actually, many human beings live in this man-made and natural disaster and emergency, in war, after an earthquake, in a famine area. Where there's sheer action for survival, or if there's such hunger already that even that action is slowed down and diminished. There's not enough energy to go and get what one needs. Then the organism dies. But most human beings who don't live in this immediate crisis act out of motives other than just those for survival. Just taking these elements that we've mentioned, the food, the housing, the clothing, what one eats, what one puts on, how one lives is dictated by tastes and pleasures that one takes in these tastes. which are remembered, learned, conditioned through one's upbringing, or one has acquired new tastes. And they motivate one's choice for how one eats and clothes and lives. The pleasures derived from past experience motivate us. To do things that were pleasurable. To get that pleasure again. It was a very interesting part of a program once on television where they had some rats, and these rats had a little electrode implanted in their brain at a spot which was called the pleasure center, an area in the brain which was designated as a pleasure center. And if that area was stimulated with a mild current, the rat would do whatever it could do to keep that stimulation going, or to get it to turn on the lever in the first place, to keep that pleasure going. And the interesting thing of that particular experiment was that to eat was less, the pleasure of eating was less motivating to the rat than the stimulation of the pleasure center in the brain. Even hungry, emaciated, it would still push that lever. I wonder whether we too have that pleasure center in the brain, hooked up with thoughts and actions, fantasies that we do, and it brings pleasure and therefore a demand for the repetition of that pleasure. That demand motivating our actions. We are motivated, aren't we, by the idea of being somebody or becoming somebody that gives pleasure, being somebody of some significance or importance in relationship with others, in a work situation, a social situation. There's pleasure in that. To be somebody. I don't think we can say this often enough, because it's such a source of our actions and feeling of well-being, fulfillment, to bring oneself into the situation as somebody. One can observe it in oneself, if one is observant and sensitive in a conversation where such a need to bring oneself into it in some kind of interesting way. Usurping the conversation, or throwing in one's so important seeming experiences. There's pleasure in that, isn't there? Why else? Why would we do it? Pleasure, or is it just a way away from the feeling of insignificance, insufficiency, inadequacy that lurks underneath this drive? the motive to impress others. And through the impression one makes on others, impress oneself, with oneself. Which is an endless process. It always has to be renewed, continued, repeated. Unless there's awareness dawns and sheds light on this futile game. This whole motive of becoming somebody better than what we are, either economically, socially, politically, religiously, spiritually, morally. A tremendous motive power in this goal of becoming somebody other than what we are, which we don't know, which we don't look at, which we ignore, or have ideas about that are painful. The whole drive to replace negative, painful images one has of oneself with positive, pleasurable ones. Can there be awareness of that whole drive and the actions that this drive motivates to become somebody, if only in fantasy, but then also the drive to make that fantasy real, become that person with more power, more prestige, more social esteem. Not only the pleasure of it, but the imagined security of it. I say imagined because today the esteem one gets from others may turn into disaffection or disregard tomorrow. Criticism, or even where it was seeming love today, there may be hatred tomorrow. This whole thing of trying to be somebody helpful to others, becoming a helper, a social worker, a doctor, or someone, a healer. An altruistic person, a selfless one, being there for the others, has to be so carefully looked at and scrutinized. Not to put oneself down, but to see, is there motive in it? Self-satisfaction, self-fulfillment. In the process of healing or helping or alleviating other people's pains, which may or may not be the case if one isn't sensitive. One may not may not be able to alleviate someone else's pain. But in that urge to do it and in carrying it out as best as one can, is there also the pleasure of what one is, the fulfillment, the satisfaction of it? satisfaction of the image of a helper or a healer. Self-importance, pride, being somebody special, and the clinging to that. The same goes for the arts, for anything, any field in which one goes, not just to enjoy it for its own sake, or earn a living in order to take care of one's basic needs, but in order to be somebody in the public eye and therefore in one's own eye. Public eye and one's own inner gazing eyes upon the self are very synonymous. I'm remembering somebody saying, so often when you say things, I immediately experience it as you're talking about a no-no. So let's guard against immediately thinking I shouldn't be doing this, because then one is not free to observe these phenomena that are being talked about. Then if one may come upon it, one will immediately not look, because it's a no-no, one shouldn't be this way. Because she seems to have said that. So can one be on guard against this mechanism in the brain to think in opposites? If something is pointed out as being so, or being dangerous, isolating, separating, divisive, or so, it is so. Not one shouldn't be this way, or one should be the opposite. Just to look in all unguarded, undefended openness at how we live. And think and act. As these motives and actions are developed here as we're looking at them, does the thought come up again, then if I had no motive, would I do anything? If I saw the self-satisfaction in being an artist or a physician, a healer, or a social worker, if I saw the self-motive in it and the self-motive maybe dropped away, would I still be doing that? One has to find out. One cannot assume that action can only take place when there is a motive, whatever the motive may be or come from. We assume that. I think we basically assume that unless we have a motive which is somehow or other self-fulfilling, we wouldn't do anything. Becoming selfless or equally being a motive to act for the sake of the satisfaction of being selfless, the image of a selfless one. So is one afraid of looking at motives for fear one may not continue to do what one enjoys doing? My world may collapse if I looked, so I won't look. Shy away from that. So a new question has presented itself, which is, can motive, self-seeking, self-centered motive, be seen? Not just thought about, but seen. Radically seen, as it is, not diminished or touched over, touched up, but seen. And action be there, action continue out of no motive. By radically seen, I mean that if a self-centered motive is seen, it drops. But that may be going too far, that may be jumping. Maybe we should first ask, can it be seen and will not be rendered immobile? In a conflict, in a bind. I shouldn't be self-centered, so therefore there's no use continuing with the work. See, that's not seeing. That's thinking about self-centeredness and substituting for one image of being the selfless one, substituting the image of being self-centered. The one image motivates one, the other image paralyzes one. It's not insight. So can one do something which one started out to do, to satisfy self-image or create self-image? See that process and carry on without it? That has to be tried out by each one of us. Not think I must be a pure person to start working, and since I'm not, what's the use of starting to work? But whichever way one finds oneself, working, doing, to look, to question, and to discover motive, self-image, the energy that comes from a self-image that is appreciated by others, acknowledged or admired, and wonder whether one can work without that. Whether this is an absolutely necessary ingredient in carrying out this work. Whatever one may be doing. Work, question, see, work, question, see as one go, and maybe drop something here and there. Lighten this burden. We may discover that it is possible to do something for its own sake. And not feel drab, washed out, depressed, deflated. Which means really there with what one is doing. Which may never before have been the case. Because the fulfillment, the image, how one is seen by others, how one will be praised for it or rewarded for it, the paycheck, the advancement, that was foremost important in the mind. Not this thing itself. that one is doing. And maybe that isn't the important thing, the thing that one is doing, but the whole state of mind. The whole state of mind and body in harmony, not out of kilter, open, not with this nagging self-image or the luring self-image as the motivating force. Then maybe out of that state of harmony, of mind and psyche and body and emotions, one is there with what is, and not just the detail of it. Not just the detail of what one is doing this moment, even though that is there, but everything around one, the people, the ground and the sky. The trees, which are often very little visible if one is in an office full of computers. I've never been in one, but I see it on TV and one wonders how people survive in that. All artificial light, probably air conditioning, no open window. This reminds me that the question of work is brought up often in meetings. Not in the terms that we've just approached it. Would I work if I had no motive? But work per se, how one works. Maybe we can talk a bit about that as time. It seems that with most people with whom one is talking, not just here, but also when one travels, family and so forth, most people seem to work too much. At least that's the feeling. And maybe not just the feeling, but the reality of it. Whether it's here on staff or not on staff, in a family, in a school, on the land. Almost everywhere there is this overload of work. In addition to the hours one puts into the work for which one gets a paycheck, or room and board. And there's all the other things one does. Either more work, extra work to get more money, committee work. If one is in some institution or school, one is asked to serve on committees. Volunteer work in the community. And then taking on as they grow up all the things that the children have to do, or that one has once initiated the children to do, and then having to cart them here and there to their little workplaces or entertainment or training places. Wherever we are, we seem to be under pressure with all the things we have to do. And in addition, really should be doing, but don't get around to it. And then the burden of the guilt of not getting around to it. Or the guilt of seeing somebody else who, in spite of all of his or her burden, still gets around to that too. Comparison, which one comes out at the bottom. Not having the energy to do that too. And the pressure of all of that. Why do we live as we live under such incredible pressure? Almost all the time. Is that that we want to live that way? We would immediately say no, but why do we all live that way? Why do we all end up that way? Living under pressure. To work, to do, to perform, to serve, to help, to be available. Does it, if one just takes stock for a moment and just sits with this question, with the fact and the question about it. Not immediately searching for solutions to this problem, but sitting with a problem to understand it. Why is one doing that? Why does one find oneself in that? What are all the motives and ingredients that play here? Are there any? To just start from scratch. To let this situation, this phenomenon, reveal itself in all its complexity. And maybe clarify somewhat, shed some light through this being with it, sitting with it. Doesn't have to be on a mat. Wondering about it. Letting it ask questions and inquire into this. Why it is so, and whether it has to continue that way, whether this is how human beings have to live. One may say, yes, we do. That's the only way we can live. Well, then one will not inquire. And one will go on with it and wear oneself out. You could say, well, how do you know you're going to wear yourself out? Maybe it's good for the system. I don't know. Most people who talk with me about this already feel that the wear out is in progress, setting in, even though one may not be old of age. Happens in young new families, husband and wife, working. And then the kids, when one comes home. And how can one be with each other and with the children or friends if one is under pressure, or if one has to explode that pressure every once in a while? It's inevitable that there's friction, tension, inability to leisurely be with each other. Find out about each other on an equal level, on the same level. Unhurried and unrushed, unpressured. Not the pressure, now I gotta also be a little bit with the family. The pressure of that. Is it impossible to have leisure? I don't mean indolence, not laziness of being too, I don't know what, too turned off, too burnt out, and therefore not doing, but the leisure as an aliveness of being without pressure. Therefore, even on a brief walk, to be all there with everything. May not have to do with length of time that one can spend with everything that one is doing, but again, the state, the harmony of the mind and body and psyche and emotions, the harmony of all of that, which can only happen when there's no pressure to be anything or any which way. I think all of us can ask whether we have to do all the things that we're doing. Not take it for granted that we have to do any one of those. Start from scratch and see what are the basic needs. Which doesn't mean living in a hut of palm leaves. Well, we're not in the South. This image comes to mind. We recently saw a movie. What's called Mission. Maybe you've seen it. A lot of fantasy in there too. Sort of a taste of how one could live without pressure of civilization. Not civilization, pressure, well, I don't want to go into it. Because there's a lot of idealism in that. What I was coming from was the basic needs don't have to exclude having a vacation, having some money for having a vacation, going to the mountains or being on the water. So the job, the paycheck, may have to include money for that. Doesn't mean having to run around in rags. If one has a taste and like for clothes, for their own sake, for their comfort, for their beauty, not just how will I look in the eyes of others. One can think that way, but one can see it takes a toll. That takes a toll. There's a constant pressure in there to please others. So to start from scratch, can one just for fun think it through, what one really needs to do and what maybe one can dispense with doing. Not from a narrow point of view, not looking at detail after detail, but starting from a broad point of view, no point of view, from a mind that is in harmony. that isn't torn by motive of self-fulfillment with its conflicts, also should be selfless, should serve. At the same time, when one gathers for oneself, one should also give away. And these tensions under which we live, contradictions of image. Here, in a retreat where there's relatively little work, for some people it's more, people, staff have more to do, and still, considering the whole 24 hours, it is relatively little. Can one see how one works as one works? Is one really there, in harmony, inside and out? Able to drop the habitual conditioned pressure. It's a habit. Pressure per se is habit. To work under pressure, even when there is no pressure. Furiously chopping up something or stirring something. No reason for it. It's become an autonomous habit. Can one discover that, detect it, and wonder whether it has to be that way? And find out it doesn't. It doesn't take any more time to work without pressure than with pressure. It's much better for the whole system, for the nervous system, the heart, the muscles, the whole body-mind starts to flourish when pressure is absent. Then the movements themselves, the movements of the hands, arms, or legs, have a feedback on the whole state of mind. And the state of mind has a feedback on the movement of the arms, hands, and legs. That's what is harmony. Noticing pressurized movement, not condemning it, not say it shouldn't be so. Or I have a reason, I have to be there, done on time. Noticing that too, the rationalizations, the clinging to our miserable habits. Miserable, I mean making us miserable. To see that clinging and drop it. Just try something new. Noticing one's rushing around and wondering whether it has to be this way. Actually, the noticing is already the slowing down. Because a mind that notices this is slowing down or quiet. So one will notice how one has just slurred over something because one was thinking what one will do afterwards. And so paying attention now, because afterwards is not now. Now is sufficient, completely sufficient. The wholeness of it. Not just a little task, but the wholeness of it. It's connected with everything and everyone. And the sky and the sun and the clouds and the ground. Where is one hurrying to? For what is one in such a hurry for? Can one just listen? Not listen to something, but listen, that's enough. Open listening. Listening being synonymous for seeing, and let what is there reveal itself. It needs no pressure. We will end here for today.